The Employment Equity Amendment Act is not only unconstitutional, it is also standing firmly in the way of creating jobs. People in this country want to have a job, and they don't want anything to stand in their way to get one. It is not the job of government to create jobs. It is the job of the private sector to create jobs. It is the job of government to create an environment that is conducive for investment and conducive for the private sector to enable them to create jobs. What this Amendment Act is doing is it is placing more stringent measures again on the private sector, prohibiting them from growing and creating jobs. It is a privilege for me to now introduce the federal chairperson of Federal Council of the Democratic Alliance, Helen Zille, to address us on this matter. Thank you very much, Helen.
Thank you very much, Willie. Thank you very much, Willie, and my colleagues, Michael Bagram, as we call him, and Nazli Sharif, and a very warm welcome to all of you here today. Thanks for coming in your numbers on this crucial matter. We are going to be in the North Gauteng High Court tomorrow on a crucial issue. It's an issue that we launched in our court papers more than 2 years ago. So it's not a recent thing that has emerged, for example, out of the draconian new quotas you've seen published on social media and in the newspapers. This comes a long way from the 6th Parliament, when the then Employment Equity Amendment Bill was passed, and we opposed it from the beginning for the key reason, as Willie has explained, that it will continue to drive unemployment up, economic growth down, and make far more people unemployed and marginalized in our economy than they already are. One thing I've learned in all my years in politics is that you never judge a bill by the intention of the government. You judge the act that follows by the impact it has in the real world. And that is the critical measure. And we're not flying blind here. We've had an employment equity regime which was meant to drive employment equity for the last 25 years. And we've seen since 2008 unemployment almost double, from 5.5 million on the expanded definition to 11.1 million last year. And that is primarily as a result of failed government policies that drive away investment and discourage growth. That wasn't their intention, I'm sure, but it is the effect. And we've done many surveys of potential investors who decide not to invest or who disinvest from South Africa, and they name electricity uncertainty and race laws as the primary factor that drive away investment. So we must judge things in the real world by the impact it has on more and more people driven into extreme poverty, and millions of children literally are feeling the effects of that through stunting and malnutrition. That's the impact. And so are you going to continue tightening a regime that has already had that impact, or are you going to look for another strategy to empower and include marginalized people who need to get into an inclusive economy? The DA is absolutely committed to achieving that. We want employment to reach levels of highly developed, functioning, booming economies, and we can do that with the right policy regime. And that would be real inclusion, real redress, real transformation. But continuing a failed system and taking precisely the elements that made it fail and make them worse is in fact doing precisely the opposite of transformation, redress, and inclusion. And that is our main problem with this act. Now, we all know that Section 9 of the Constitution is the Equality Clause. Section 9.2 is the Redress Clause. Section 9, which is the Equality Clause, forbids discrimination on a whole host of grounds. Section 9.2 says there is such a thing as fair discrimination to redress the legacy of the past. But that is not a blunt instrument. Any discrimination that is deemed to be fair has to be proved to be fair. You can't just do anything in the name of redress and claim it is fair discrimination. There's a benchmark that has to be reached to qualify as fair discrimination under Section 9.2. And this Act fails that benchmark test 100%, we believe. And that is the primary constitutional argument that we will be making in court. We have a technical argument as well, which is that this Act should have been tagged under Section 76 of the Constitution because it has such a profound impact on many of the provinces. Now, as you will all know, when a bill that is before Parliament is going to impact provinces, it has to go through the process defined in Section 76 of the Constitution. And that is a different process from a bill that doesn't particularly impact the provinces, which then goes through a Section 75 process. A 76 process is different from a Section 75 process, and one of the primary differences is that it gives a much bigger role to the National Council of Provinces because they represent the provinces, and if the NCOP turns it down, you need a two-thirds majority in Parliament to pass that. So it's a fundamental different process, and we're arguing that it should have been done under Section 76. But that's the technical argument. We also have a substantive and principal argument that I set out to you at the beginning. Now, we had a previous employment equity regime that was passed, I think it was 26 or 27 years ago. And that one allowed companies to set targets to achieve more equity in their workplaces for designated groups, which are people of color, women, and people with disabilities. And they enabled companies themselves to look at their context, to look at the number of people qualified in the specific fields that they might need, to look at their geographical situation, to look at a whole range of factors that impact on your business, and then to set targets, and then to seek to achieve those targets. There were penalties for not achieving the targets, but one of the fundamental ways in which this new Amendment Act goes far further is that it puts extreme penalties on companies for not achieving quotas set by the minister. And that is a fundamental difference. In the previous regime, companies looked at a whole range of factors affecting their businesses, and they could then set targets that they felt were fair, stretch targets often, that they felt were fair and that they could reach, and they were judged according to those. In this new regime, the minister, under Section 15 of the Act, gets to be able to set draconian national targets for every sector of the economy. Sectoral targets, they're called. It's a blunt one-size-fits-all regime for the entire sector, and that can be national. And every employer in that sector will have to meet them. And if they do not, a labour inspector can go out. The Director General of Labour can put a huge fine on that company amounting to 10% of turnover. Not 10% of profit, 10% of turnover as a penalty. Now that ceases to be a target. When you have an imposed target set by the national minister that doesn't take any account of the context in which your firm operates and makes a sectoral target binding on every single employer in that sector, and then imposes a severe penalty for failure to reach it, that is no longer a target. That is a quota. And our courts have previously and repeatedly found that quotas are unconstitutional. There were some famous cases in the police force, for example, where an Indian person was denied promotion at one of the top ranks of the SAP because they said they had already appointed one Indian person and their quota in the population as a whole did not allow them to appoint another Indian person because they formed too small a proportion of the national population. And that was taken to court, and the court ruled that that was unconstitutional because it set an absolute barrier against a person on the basis of criteria that they had no control over, the circumstances of their birth. And so, while we strongly support in the Democratic Alliance redress measures, they need to be fair, they need to be rational, they need to promote economic growth, and they need to get people into jobs. That is the number one objective. We have a youth unemployment rate of 42%. That is horrific. It's the highest recorded unemployment rate in the world. And the most important form of redress is to get people into jobs. The more you get people into jobs, the more they're included in the economy, the more they have dignity, the more inequality comes down, the Gini coefficient reduces. Getting a job is the best way to fight crime. It is the best way to give people dignity and a future. And the best way to get a job is to have a government that creates policies that encourage investment and that don't punish investors and set all kinds of barriers to investment. Because people with good ideas and capital and skills can invest anywhere in the world. Everyone wants them. Our government often departs from the point of departure that says in its own head, people have to invest, business have to invest in South Africa, so they might as well invest on our terms. It doesn't work like that. If government sets policy that creates terms that are unacceptable and that are impossible to meet without fear of tremendous penalties and big fines and the risk of criminalization through a charge through the labor court, who's going to take that chance? People are going to close down their businesses and certainly are not going to invest here. And so this is the very opposite of redress and the very opposite of transformation. And that is something that we need to understand. We can't keep on pushing a failed experiment and tightening the screws tighter and tighter and believe things will improve. The unraveling of our economy is the only thing that is going to accelerate, and jobless numbers are going to grow and grow. And so the DA's approach to this is policies that encourage investment, that drastically improve education. And as more and more jobs come onto the scene, more and more people get into jobs, there are also more and more senior jobs as companies invest. And that is the best form of transformation because there's a growing pool of jobs and a shrinking pool of minorities, actually. So the best way to empower majorities is to grow the economy. It's as simple as that. Instead, we have policies that shrink the economy, which means you get an already empowered elite fighting with each other over a shrinking number of jobs. And it's an insane system. We also believe it's unconstitutional because it's manifestly unfair. And when you discriminate to achieve redress, which we support in specific circumstances, we do not believe that this act meets that benchmark. It is specifically going to discriminate against particular categories of people. One thinks of Indians in KwaZulu-Natal and coloured people in the Western Cape, for example. It's just a consequence of our history that there's a very large concentration of Indian people in KwaZulu-Natal and a very significant number of coloured people in the Western Cape. But if you apply national targets to the Indian population, I don't know exactly what percentage the Indian population makes up of South Africa, but I don't think it could be more than 3%. So if a national target is imposed on firms in KwaZulu-Natal, how many Indian people are going to have to lose their jobs to meet the targets and the quotas? It's going to mean that not only will people not be able to get jobs because firms will close down, it will mean that people in jobs will have to be let go because the firm is going to face severe penalties and the risk of criminalization for not meeting what is in fact a quota. Now, those are totalitarian powers. They don't belong in a democracy. And they certainly don't belong in a country where we desperately need jobs above everything else. So the DA's commitment is to see the millions of young people who have a future that can only be described as hopeless, to give them hope by ensuring we grow this economy and get people into jobs and improve education and ensure that people have the skills they need to compete for the jobs that are there. And that we don't have a country that continues to define everybody according to their race and their other biological attributes that they had no control over, and make sure that everyone understands that their ability, their opportunity, and their work ethic is what is going to get them to the top, not their race and not their political connections. Our Constitution promises us the goal of a non-racial, democratic, and just society. And when we see measures that are taking us in the opposite direction, the DA has to call halt. Of course, the ANC is going to say things to us, for example, like, you are anti-transformation. In fact, every one of the DA's policies drives the real transformation, which will happen through economic growth and more jobs for more and more people. That is real transformation. The only people who are significantly anti-transformation is people who take failed policies that have doubled the unemployment rate since 2008 and turn the screws tighter on those failed policies. And that is why we are going to court. We are committed to a non-racial, inclusive, democratic South Africa. All of us have worked as hard as we can to achieve that. Our support is growing because of that, and we're not going to stop now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen. It's now a privilege for me to introduce Mr. Michael Bagram, who is the spokesperson on employment and labour and is also a member of Parliament. Michael has been a labour lawyer for more than 40 years now, and he has been involved in this process when the previous Parliament, the sixth Parliament, deliberated and voted on this Amendment Act. Well, it's not a bill anymore, it's an act now. So it's a privilege for me, and thereafter I will introduce Nashley Sharif, who is a MPL here in Gauteng, who will then handle questions, but I will do that afterwards. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you, and thanks very much for coming. The bottom line is that the Minister has to show that she can discharge the onus of proof that the engineering that she's entered into does not break the legislation and that it is fair discrimination. Now, the word fair in the discrimination is absolutely vital. all of us have come from a dark past where we had the National Party who entered into discrimination, and that discrimination was social engineering of its highest form. We've seen this throughout history where social engineering has been a major nightmare. We saw it with the Nazis, we've seen it across Europe, and we saw it, in fact, in this country for many years under the National Party. We can't have that again. We don't want to have a race register again. I don't know if you've all seen, but they've now put out a form where you have to fill in, each employee has to fill in a form to say whether they are white, black, Indian, colored, male, female, disabled, etc. Now that is harking back to the past, and our court case is about that very onus. That's what it boils down to. It's a simple concept. The minister has to show that these targets are there specifically because it's going to create some sort of redress. Now, as Helen has explained, quite simply, we've had 26 years of exactly the same legislation, and we are expecting a different result. Now, every year, all of us watch, and I'm sure all of you have been watching the employment figures. Every year it goes down and down, and every year we have a problem and we all scream and shout and say, why are we so bad? Why are we the worst employment in the world? And the worst employment in the world, because COSATU tells us we're at 42% now in the expanded definition. In fact, Helen, COSATU is telling us that the youth are almost at 70% unemployment. Now, if that's the case, there's got to be something wrong. We can't, and as Helen puts it, you can't tighten the screws on the legislation. I'll put it slightly differently. You can't take that same experiment, like Einstein said, and have a result and then keep doing it for 26 years and expect a different result. That's a sign of madness. And we need to actually then go to the courts, which we're going to be doing tomorrow, and we'll argue this out, that the minister has not in any way effectively looked at discharging that onus of fairness, because that's what our constitution is. It's got a golden thread that runs through that constitution, and that golden thread is one of fairness. And we're not here to have a race register. We're not here to have people judged on what the color of their skin is. Now, there's argument, there is, yes, solid argument saying that you're still reflecting the majority of the upper echelons of the employment are white, pale and male. And yes, that is absolutely correct. But the legislation has made it worse. So what we're looking at is redress. Now, the Democratic Alliance is a party of the Constitution. We completely adhere to the law. We completely adhere to the Constitution, and we're not going to breach the law or the Constitution, whether you agree with it, whether you agree with the law or not. We're not going to breach that law. We do agree with the Constitution. And here we have a chance. We need to use the tools that the Constitution allows us to go to the courts and to say that a piece of legislation is wrong. It's unconstitutional. And why is it unconstitutional? And I hark back to it again. It's because it's unfair. And it's unfair to everyone, because if you're doing that, the business community are going to tell us, quite simply, that they're going to stop growing. We've already seen with the large business community jobless growth. You've all seen that, where people are making more money, but they're not creating any jobs. So the world is telling us that who creates the jobs in the world today, and in particular in South Africa? It's the small business community. And the small business community, I can tell you right now, are in the situation now where they're standing and looking at this and saying, well, we're over 50 people, because the legislation recognizes that under 50 people you don't have to adhere to this legislation. We're over 50 people, let's shrink. Let's shrink to under 50, or let's invest elsewhere. Let's mechanize, let's computerize. Let's do everything we can to not employ anyone. Now, anecdotally, I practice in the field of labor law, and I'm in the CCMA and the Labor Court weekly. Anecdotally, I'm telling you now that the small business community are very excited, of course, because those under 50 employees saying, well, no, we mustn't grow to 51, God forbid, because we're going to have to face this unfair situation. Those that are under 50 are planning to do whatever they do and to employ whoever they need to employ. I haven't met one business person who says, I'm not going to employ that person because they happen to be colored, or they happen to be black or disabled. What they're doing is they're employing people that are productive And we've got to understand that. That's what business is all about. They employ people that are productive and can grow their business and grow the economy in due course. That's what this is all about. And we all in Ship South Africa together. Ship South Africa has developed a leak. That leak has created massive unemployment and, in fact, deemed to be the worst in the world. We're also deemed to be the most unproductive. The bottom line is we need to look at it and say, how can we actually turn Ship South Africa around? How can we do it? Now, the Western Cape has followed this experiment now for over 6 years, and they've brought the unemployment down to just below 19%. That's half, less than half of what the unemployment is in the rest of the country. Why? It's not because the Cape Townians are better than anyone else. It's not because the Cape Townians are more productive or more industrious. That's not the truth of the matter. We're all South Africans. But what's happened over there is they're looking at red tape, they're looking at other ways and means of how the Democratic Alliance can actually show that we can actually have the redress by the hard yards. This government is hoping to avoid the hard yards, unfortunately, by just legislating themselves into what they believe is going to be redress. It's not going to be redress. Not if you're shrinking the economy, there's no redress. And so if anyone has to be accused of breaching that constitution, and that is the government at the moment. The government at the moment has passed a law that is wrong. It is wrong. It's wrong for all of us. It's wrong in the law, but it's wrong for all of us that need jobs. Every single family in this country is affected by joblessness. Every single family I hear about tells me that they've got members of their family that can't find a job with. It doesn't matter what color they are. And I'm hoping at the end of the day we don't have to bring in a race register through this legislation, because that's what it is. When we all have to fill in a form, all of us have to fill in a form, we're all employed, and that form will tell you what you are. And what happens if Michael Bagram decides that I'm female and black? Who's going to challenge me? Who's going to say I'm not? What you're trying to do is you're trying to make liars out of South Africans, and it's wrong altogether. So thank you. I'm hoping at the end of the day that everyone sees that what we're trying to do at the Democratic Alliance is actually build the country to ensure that the redress comes, because as soon as the economy grows, we'll see that it does happen, and it does happen that we have redress everywhere. I haven't met anyone, and I want to end off on this, I haven't met anyone in the last 20 years, because I go to the CCMA, call it twice a week. People come to me, I represent employees. They come to me and they ask for representation. There is law now that says that if you've been discriminated against because you happen to be black, female, disabled, and that you weren't able to get your job because of that. I've had in that last 20 years 2 cases. So everyone's shouting and telling me that there's discrimination at the workplace. But where is it? Those people can come forward. The trade unions aren't scared to come forward and say our people didn't get jobs because they happen to be black. That's not true. That's absolutely not true. And I need that people to come forward and tell me Joe Soap couldn't get a job because he happened to be black. I haven't seen that. I've seen a few of the disabled. Just another thing I must tell you, and it's a strange concept, but we know that part of the community, part of the ought to be working community should be 6% disabled. Our government, under our previous minister, Thulas Nkezi, set a figure of 3% with working within government of the disabled community. They never reached 1%. Are they somehow not wanting the redress? What's government doing? And of course, the truth of the matter is they were trying to get people into the economy and especially into government jobs, but they could never reach 1%. Now they've set a figure of 3% again to come. I think it's actually higher. They've set it at 4%. But themselves cannot do that. It's an idiosyncrasy. It's not really. What it is government is trying their desperation to employ as many people to create their own redress, but they're not getting there. And why? It's because, unfortunately, the economy is shrinking. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Michael. I will now introduce Najli Sharif. I would just like to ask that the questions must be with regards to this topic and the court case. Any questions on other topics we can handle afterwards in one-on-one. So let's just stick to this for now. Najli, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Philly, and good afternoon, everybody. I will be handling the question-answer session. So I'm going to start on my right, and then I'll move to my left. I'll take it 3 questions at a time. Please tell me your name, where you're publishing, your publication, and who the question is directed to. So we'll take the first 3 in the first row, and then we'll get the answers, then we'll come and we'll do the second row, and then we'll move on to the side. Is that okay? So remember name, publication, and who your question is directed to.
Thank you very much, Nasli. It's Zianda Ngobo from Newsroom Africa. It's quite great that Michael actually reflected on, the skewed representation, pale and male. So how did the DA, or what tools of analysis did the DA use to reach the conclusion that it's actually this Employment Equity Amendment Act that is causing these levels of disinvestment? And I noticed, Helen, that you used the famous phrase from Elon Musk and Donald Trump, race laws. What is the threshold of unfairness according to the DA, and how exactly do you propose the government monitors its transformation mandate as a developmental state? And linked to that, Helen, this is for you, especially when it comes to the strained relations in the government of national unity. You've consistently been accused of being anti-transformation because, in essence, how do you undo a crime against humanity, which was a legislated law to subjugate a particular racial group or groupings, if you don't legislate again to undo that? Thank you.
Thank you, Zianda. Go ahead.
Christian de Plessis from Netwerk 24. This question is directed to Helen Zille. So, Fikile Mbalula het onlangs uitgevaar oor die DA se jongste hofsaak en het onder meer die party as 'n oppositieparty bestempel nadat hy ook onlangs uitgevaar het teen die DA oor die BTW hofsaak en die party se posisionering binne die RNE. President Ramaphosa het ook onlangs gesê die DA moet verduidelik wat sy wrok is teen transformasie. Wat is jou reaksie op Mbalula en Ramaphosa se uitlatings en met die bakleierery oor die Bella wet, die nasionale gesondheidsversekering, buitelandse beleid ensovoorts, sien die DA nog steeds kans om in die RNE aan te bly, veral nou dat die ANC op byna omtrent elke geleentheid die DA oor sy voortgesette deelname aan die RNE kap. En dan you also said that this court case is from 2 years ago when die wysigingswet byna ingedien is. So I just want to know exactly why is this case only being heard now? When did the DA actually file the court papers? As I understand it was last week, just to give clarity on where the run up to this case. And then just for clarity, I must have not heard, I think I missed it. In court papers, you argue that on the merits that the amendment bills fails on the benchmark test relating to proof of fair discrimination. Why are you arguing this? And can you just give more information on why you're arguing that there's a lack of proof of fair discrimination, and is this the crux of the argument? Thank you.
Thank you. Olivia.
Good morning. My name is Alfa Ramushwan. I'm a journalist at Eyewitness News. I apologize if I'm going to be repeating. I don't understand Afrikaans. My first question has to do with the GNU. Do you not fear that going to the courts once again is going to upset some of the members of the government of national unity? I mean, the ANC, for one, is very angry that you had to take the budget impasse to the courts. Dumiseni Ntuli at the ANC briefing last week was upset that the Employment Equity Amendment Act is also going to court now. Do you not fear GNU partners won't be happy with this? And how can government ensure that these disadvantaged groups, I mean women, people living with disabilities, and black people are assisted to participate in the economy and the workforce? What's your alternative measure? Thank you.
Thank you. Helen?
To be honest, I thought that my input answered most of those questions, but I'm quite happy to repeat the position. What is going to achieve the transformation mandate most? What is going to achieve the transformation mandate most in 9.2 of the Constitution is a growing economy and more jobs. What is going to militate against it most is a shrinking economy and fewer jobs. And as you get fewer and fewer jobs, elites fight over the shrinking number of jobs that exist at the top of the pyramid, and you encourage mass immigration of skills, which is also a massive underminer of economic growth and development. And instead of using all the skills we've got to drive more investment and more growth, we drive our skills out of the country and we ensure that investment shrinks and more people are unemployed and fewer people can get onto the first rung of the employment ladder. That is the real situation. And if anybody has believed that the employment equity laws so far have achieved greater inclusion in the economy, which has to be the benchmark for transformation, then they just have to look at the consequences of what has happened with this legislation to reach an evidence-based conclusion. Some ideological objective may exist in somebody's head, but even if the consequences are unintended, when you see what those consequences are, you adjust your strategy. That's what rational people do. They don't double down on a strategy that has doubled the unemployment rate. So that is the critical point that we are making here. And if you simply want to look at people at the very top of the economy, that obviously takes time. That's a process of development and takes time. But when those jobs are shrinking as well, because the economy is disinvesting, then it's not that you're including the unemployed and the marginalized. You are enabling the already empowered scrap for a shrinking number of jobs. And that's not transformation. So I thought I'd answer that question, but you talk about a crime against humanity with race legislation. Well, we say that you don't resolve the crime of race legislation, which defines everybody in terms of specific criteria that they had no control over in terms of the circumstances of their birth. You don't deal with that legacy by perpetuating it. You have to change it. So that's the answer to that question. And then also, how do we know that these race laws are a big barrier to investment? Well, look at the surveys that have been done of employers and what their barriers are to investment. They will tell you. Number one used to be energy insecurity. I'm sure it's about to be overtaken in Gauteng by water insecurity, because that's another issue. That's another issue. The government may be transformed, but they can't deliver water to people's houses or businesses. And that means that more and more people leave and come to the Western Cape or come to places where you can switch on a tap and get clean water. That's the consequence. So it's not helping to transform anything to drive away businesses like that. But go and look at the surveys that have been done of employers and see what they say and take them seriously. Because the job of a government is to get rid of the barriers to investment and growth, because you want new jobs. Right, Christian, sal jy omgee as ek in Engels antwoord?
Ja, natuurlijk.
En ek kan later in Afrikaans met jou gesels hieroor as dit reg is. Okay, goed. All right, now, we are not in the government of national unity to please the ANC or anyone else. We're in the government of national unity because we want to stand up for South Africans and make a success of South Africa. That's why we're there. We are in the government of national unity because we want South Africa to succeed. Those of us who are in the DA are in the DA because we believe that the DA has the best policies to achieve that. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, where can we make greater progress towards achieving success for South Africa? And at the moment, we believe that being inside the government of national unity gives us more leverage than if we were outside the government of national unity. I can't say that that will always be the case, but it's not my decision. The DA has structures and procedures through which these decisions are taken. And our job is to stand up for what we know and believe is right, as we are doing, not to please other parties. The only people we're trying to please is our current voters and our future voters when they see that our arguments are actually right and that what we need is a stronger DA to rescue South Africa. So I know that Fikile Mbalula has often said the DA has defined itself out of the government of national unity. Well, we continue, we're still there. And there may come a point where the DA structures and procedures decide that we can't achieve anything through it anymore. But the big question in politics is compared to what? Where can you achieve more? We achieved far more against the VAT increase by being inside the government of national unity. We are going to achieve far more against the Expropriation Act by being inside the government of national unity. And we are even going to achieve far more with the Bella Act by having a DA Minister of Education who sets the norms, standards and regulations for the application of Bella. So obviously, there are many incompatibilities between us and the ANC. But if we were to go into the government of national unity and make our first priority to be popular with the ANC, we'd end up after the next election with 2% of the vote. And we don't intend to do that. So that is, I hope, the answer to your question. En wat kan ons... Okay, then court minority... Yeah, okay. What do we believe in this act is unfair discrimination against minorities? Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, the act empowers the minister to set rigid national targets enforced by really stiff penalties that actually amount to a quota. And quotas are unconstitutional. That's number one. Number two, they are so inflexible that they can't take account of geographic differences in population makeup and various other things. Thirdly, they put an enormous onus on employers at the cost of crippling their businesses through fines, giving them a criminal record through the Labour Court, and excluding them from all government tenders and businesses, which is unfair discrimination in terms of several clauses in the Constitution. I think that gives you just some of the things. For discrimination to be fair, the Constitution puts the onus on people who claim to be fairly discriminating to prove that it is fair. Because in terms of Section 9 of the Constitution, all discrimination is presumed to be unfair until you can demonstrate that it's fair. But that still requires it to reach a benchmark. And we argue that this act fails to reach that benchmark. And then Alvil, is that your name?
Alpha.
Alpha. And Omega, that Alpha. Oh, perfect. Oh, perfect. Alpha, what a great name. Okay. Yeah, I've answered your question already. Our benchmark is not whether we annoy people. We don't really mind annoying people. If you mind annoying people, you really mustn't be in politics. If you want to win an election, you've got to win an argument. If you want to win an argument, you've got to start an argument.
Can I just answer one?
Okay.
I just want to give one example, and this might resonate, and I think it will. The government, in its wisdom, and I put that in inverted commas, has said that if your business is under 50 people, you are exempt from the legislation altogether, never mind your turnover. And you take that, and we know, and economists the world over are telling us, that in this modern economy, it's small businesses that are creating jobs. So we know that. So you take that, on the one hand, where they're saying under 50, you are exempt, and we want you to grow to 50. And on the other hand, that's where the growth is going to be. What the government is actually telling you is that the legislation itself is anti-transformation. Clearly, there's no other reason why they said under 50 you would be exempt. It can't be any. It's not a thumbsuck. They must have realized that it's true that in South Africa today, who's creating the jobs? It's the informal sector. It's the small business sector. They're creating the jobs. If they're the people that are creating the jobs, don't tie their hands with the regulations. Don't tie their hands with unfair regulations that will stymie the growth of your business and actually keep it solid. And so what I've done is I've put together the two factors to show you that the government itself agrees with us. I think what's happened over here, by putting those quotas together, they are trying to appeal to what they believe is the electorate will be fooled into believing that if you're doing this, then we're doing something to create jobs for blacks, women, and disabled. And it's not true, by their own definition, because of the 50. I just thought I'd mention that because it's quite clear in my mind.
Thank you, Michael. I would just like to, Zianda, come to one question that you've asked as well as Christian. The term race laws was not invented by Donald Trump or Elon Musk. It was most used in South Africa by Nelson Mandela, who fought against race laws. So I don't think we should make this the Elon Musk or Donald Trump thing. We should fight any injustice. Then with regards to the DA being accused of being an opposition, I'm a member of Parliament and I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. And the Constitution expects of all members of Parliament to hold the executive to account. Now, for many years, 30 years, when the ANC governed alone, they saw members of Parliament as a rubber stamp for the decisions that the executive took. The game is not the same anymore. We are now in a government of national unity, where myself as a member of Parliament, Michael Bagram, the other colleagues of us that are here, will uphold that oath that we took, and we will keep the executive to account. And anybody that sees that as being an opposition to government is making a mistake. And I would really want to tell South Africans that the mere fact that the Democratic Alliance now is also in government even makes that responsibility greater. Because we've got ministers from the Democratic Alliance, which we must also now have to hold to account. And we are, and we will continue to do that. So people must not see us as being in opposition when we are upholding the oath that we took when we became members of Parliament. Thank you very much. Thanks.
100%. We'll start there, 1, 2, and then we'll go 3. Yeah, and we'll come back in the next round. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name's Ferial Hafaji from the Daily Maverick. I wondered if the DA would acknowledge that as far as Black economic empowerment goes, employment equity has been the most successful part of that policy and has probably been a factor in the creation of 10 to 20 million Black middle class people who for the longest time were the engine beneath the growth and job creation that our economy did see, and that in fact it was the years of state capture which undermined the growth and employment trajectory which had been a key part of our country for many years. The second question is, could you explain the Section 76 tagging just in simple ways so we understand? And did you sit down with Minister Meth and explain your differences of opinion on this piece of law, given that you are in a government of national unity together, perhaps over coffee or in the clearinghouse or in any other ways that are open to you? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sam Kalamasero from the SABC. My question is directed to Helen Zilla. and it takes from my colleague Ferriel, on the issue of noting that this case is from the 6th Parliament, has it featured in any of the negotiations and deliberations you've had with the ANC in the recent chats or discussions or talks that you are having in recent times? And noting what the President of the ANC and President of the country said in Middleburg in Mpumalanga, that you as the Democratic Alliance would have to come to him and explain what is wrong with this employment equity. Have you taken up that particular option on a peer-to-peer basis of DA leader John Steenhuisen and President Ramaphosa discussing some of the policy discrepancies and disagreements that are there between the two political formations? Then lastly, on the issue of the substance of this particular case, noting that racial quotas are unconstitutional within the country, can you just explain the issue taken from Ferriel of bringing up Section 76 of this particular constitution and growing the economy? How do you grow an economy without offending investors, and noting that you have to bring in the issue of the imbalances of the past? How do you bring that up without chasing away investors? Thank you.
Thank you, Samkele. Let's move to the side of the room.
Hello.
Hello.
Peyton from Reuters. I have a question for Michael. I'm wondering if you could explain this penalties of up to 10% of turnover. I couldn't find where that was in the law. If you could just explain clearly where that number is coming from, because my granted limited understanding of BEE law in the past was that companies might forfeit government contracts but would not actually be hit with fines if they're non-compliant. So if you could explain that part and what's new.
Can I just see how many other questions there are? So 2 more questions. Yes, let's just take it and then we can come back if there's any follow-up questions, yeah?
Hi, Sianda Mteto from Reuters.
Sianda.
Yes, Sianda. So,
yeah, there's only 2 left.
No. Let's
do 3 and then come back. Okay, we'll do these 3 and then we'll come back to the 2 of you, yeah? Cool. Michael, do you want to go first?
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Ferriel, what's created a black middle class is state transformation. And no one would have a problem with that if we had a sparkling consequence of a really capable state that was doing everything that it was supposed to do, that it wasn't corrupt, that was delivering water and sewerage and all of that. But what we've built is a huge middle class through state preferencing. And in some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases, it has effectively not led to the capable state, which is absolutely imperative for a successful economy. You have to have a capable state working under the rule of law and creating policies that attract investment to have a growing economy. So what we've got is a middle class created by state preferencing. And don't for 1 minute suggest that state capture was something different from the employment equity laws. As Zondo himself pointed out, state capture was the direct result of these laws. The direct result of these laws. Because state capture involves the political party deploying its cadres using the fig leaf of employment equity legislation into key positions of the state to ensure that state institutions do not protect individuals from abuse by the state, but become extensions of the state to ensure control of all institutions that should be independent. That is state capture. And it was directly the consequence of the employment equity laws. So the two can't be separated. They are absolutely integrally linked, and that's another point that we make in our court papers. So cadre deployment and employment equity, the ANC has never been serious about empowering the marginalized. They've been serious about putting their cadres into critical positions to capture the state, to turn the state into an instrument of ANC control rather than empowerment and protection of individuals under the Constitution. That's what they've done. And the two are absolutely joined at the hip. They're not different from each other. Some Kelo. Look, let me put this as politely as I can, because I don't want to. I don't mind starting an argument on a matter of principle, but I don't like starting arguments on matters that don't have to have an argument. I think out of the last 7 meeting appointments that I've had with my counterpart in the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, he's rocked up to 2. And he was massively late. In one case, 1.5 hours late, in the other case, 45 minutes late. So I'm just telling you very bluntly that we would love to have more meetings. We would love to have more meetings. We would love to have a meeting every single month with our counterparts to talk these kinds of things through. And if your question has enabled me to ask for more meetings, well, that's great. I would like to meet, Fikile Mbalula and I have undertaken to meet each other on a specific day every month, which is going to be coming up soon, and I wait in great anticipation for whether that meeting will actually take place. Right, the clearinghouse mechanism is frankly a waste of time. It just doesn't work at all. Everybody acknowledges that. What we need is a mechanism in the Government of National Unity to implement clauses 18 and 19. And we need that mechanism. We don't need to renegotiate the rules of the game or anything. What we need is mechanisms that implement the statement of intent. That's what we need. And the clearinghouse mechanism certainly does not do that. And the ANC and ourselves and all the other parties recognize that. So we've just got to make sure that we get those mechanisms, and we can't get those mechanisms without talking to each other, and we can't get talking to each other if the meetings aren't honoured. So it's all a little vicious cycle that we're trying to fix. Because one of the critical things is that, the DA starts meetings on time, so as you saw today. And often journalists phone us and say, can you hold it? Can you hold it? I'm stuck in traffic. I said, traffic affects all of us. We're getting on with it, right? Now, it's just these fundamentals that make a government work or don't. And it's these kinds of things that we have to sort out. All right. About offending investors. Well, of course, you don't grow an economy by offending investors at all. You don't. They are absolutely precious in an economy that needs jobs. But the point is that the best way to transform the upper echelons of an economy and to get more jobs at entry level, many millions more jobs at entry level, is to grow the economy. Let me be blunt in answering your question. Let's assume, and it's not true, but let's, for the sake of your argument, assume that all employers want to be racist, which they don't, as Michael Bagram says, because he's had no cases going to the CCMA twice a week that says, I've been excluded because I'm black. But let's assume that employers want to be racist and the economy is growing and booming. There aren't enough whites in this country. They're a shrinking minority, you won't find them. Ditto for other minorities. So the best way to get transformation is to grow the economy. And the worst way is to apply methods that will shrink the economy. That's just so obvious. So, you take the skills, you don't care about the color. So the critical thing is you've got to grow the skills and grow the economy, and that combination will get you the quickest transformation ever and an economic boom like nothing else. And we had economic growth until BEE started to bite and took the inevitable form of state capture. Because I've been talking since 1996, Ferial, and go back to some of my speeches there, of what I call the 5 C's or whatever it was. Centralization of power. This is centralization of power in the minister's hands. Centralization of power, cronyism, which is cadre deployment, corruption, and the criminal captured state. And I said that is the process, inevitable. Not one possible option, the inevitable outcome. And it all happened exactly like that.
I just want to answer that one about the 10%. If you and I must tell you, it's there in the regulations. Go and have a look at it. It is there. 10% of turnover, not profit. Now, why I wanted to answer that, because it's a simple answer, but it's actually quite complicated, because when I speak to people in the business community, and I've spoken to 2 chairpersons of people on the stock exchange, are telling me that if you have to pay 10% of turnover, you will close the company down. They don't make the profit of 10% of turnover. They just don't know business in this modern economy makes 10% of their turnover as profit. So if you take that 10%, you close the business and we'll have thousands of people on the street again. Doesn't matter what color they are or where they come from, they will all be on the street. So you can see how dangerous this actually is. So when you threaten the business community like this regulation is threatening them, that you are going to get a possible fine of 10%, and they can't reach the numbers that we now have to reach in terms of it's cast in stone. It's like the Bible that the minister's done. It doesn't matter what you do about it, it's there, it's cast in stone, and then you don't reach it. And then you have to pay the 10%. Well, you close your business, liquidate, and you go to another jurisdiction and practice there. That's how dangerous this is. So yes, you hit a nail on the head by saying that, to show how dangerous this actually is to the entire economy.
Okay, you can go ahead. Remember, name, publication, and who your question is directed to.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mdntv, also from Reuters. My question is for Helen Zille. So in the private sector, white people occupy 66% of top management level posts. Does the DA see this as a problem? And in addition, what would you propose for black people not just getting jobs, but also getting into management? Thank you.
Thank you, Sianda. In the front over here, yes.
Thanks. My name is Paolo Magolero from UFM. To Helen, has the DA sponsored or merely supported any transformative piece of legislation? If there is, I was not aware of it. Please enlighten us. And I'm asking this particularly that everything that you are in court opposing, NHI, Bella Act, it's being presented as a policy mandated redress. So it puts you, as now you are opposing redress in general terms. So what law have you sponsored that? And coming back to the use of the phrase race laws, I would differ. My experience of it was not with Mandela. I actually hear it a lot more from the DA, from AfriForum, from exchanges with the USA. So I hold a different view on that. I want to ask you, don't you think that through your consistent use of it, especially bidding for help from foreign forces such as the USA, you have inadvertently put the country in harm's way, including the very constituency that you purport to represent? Because if you look at what happened in the form of the measures that Mr. Trump has been taking against South Africa, it's not affecting the general population, the majority black people, because they are not exporters. The goods that is trying to block from going there are coming from mostly the people that the DA represents. So it's my view that you are inadvertently harming the prospect of the country, including investment opportunities, by projecting it as a rogue state. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. I have space for one more question. There is space for one more question. Okay, nope. Helen, please go ahead.
Yeah. Let me just answer the last question first. Your assumption is that black people don't export. Do you know how many jobs depend on export? Let's look at the citrus industry. It's massive. We benefit from AGOA, and we export huge amounts of our citrus to the United States. If those exports fall flat, it's going to be the hundreds of thousands of jobs in that sector that are going to be gone. And by far the majority of those jobs are not white jobs. if you can give a job a colour, which I don't like to do. We went to the USA to set the record straight about what is happening in South Africa. We have got very good contacts in Washington across both parties and into very senior echelons in government. We have worked very hard in building those contacts, and it is absolutely rational and fair for us to go to the United States and put on the table what the facts are. We don't invent things. We are an evidence-based party. We work on evidence. We work on the laws, and we ensure that the people there are getting accurate information, not distorted information. And that is in South Africa's interests. That is 100% in South Africa's interests, and we put South Africa first at every moment. I think, well, one of the issues, I mean, we put many transformative bills on the table. The youth wage subsidy was one of the big issues that we drove, and we put as a bill before Parliament. Because let me explain to you as much as I can. The problem with our economy and the biggest anti-transformation factor is that it is shrinking. And our number one priority is to get more people into jobs. And for that reason, any measure at all that comes from government has to be measured against one yardstick. Will it be good for jobs or will it be bad for jobs? Jobs at the upper echelons happen over time. Experience, education, whatever it is. And it's important to have that transformation too. Certainly we think that it is very important. But to define that as the problem is to get the problem definition completely wrong. The problem is that according to COSATU, 72% of young people are unemployed. That's the problem. And let's not deflect from the real problem and have goal deflection of trying to solve the tiny problem of people fighting for jobs at the pinnacle of a shrinking economy, rather than getting more access into that economy for the unemployed. And all else will follow, with good education, good skills training, and a growing economy. That's what we have to do. And that is what we have to get right. I think that's it, is it?
The tagging.
Oh, the tagging. Sorry. I'll talk about the tagging. Okay. So, when a bill affects provinces, obviously the National Council of Provinces has to have a bigger say, because the National Council of Provinces is there to represent the provinces primarily and to give a voice to the provinces in government, which is very useful because as Premier of a province, I know how useful that can be. Now, when a bill goes through the National Assembly and is passed by a simple majority, when it goes to the NCOP and if it's tagged Section 76, then each province has one vote, which is a very important thing because that equalizes provinces. You know that provinces have different representation in the NCOP depending on the compositions of their legislatures, but with a Section 76 bill, every single province has one vote. And if 5 provinces reject a bill, a 76 bill, or 5 have to accept one, but if 5 reject one, then that bill has to go back to the National Assembly, and it cannot pass unless it gets a 2/3 majority. Now that gives provinces a lot more power than they have with a Section 75 bill, because when a Section 75 bill goes to the NCOP, then every delegate in the NCOP gets to vote. It's not one vote per province. And if it is rejected, it goes back to the National Assembly and they can pass it by a simple majority. If that makes sense. Not a 2/3 majority. So that difference is important, and certainly it will become more and more important in the future as I hope the DA will win more and more provinces, and then we can really start using the NCOP as a tool of accountability.
Is that the core argument?
That's the core argument, yeah. It's not our argument in court. Our argument in court is that it should have been tagged 76.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you, Michael and Nasli. It's always good to see. Nasli was a member of parliament and then she decided that she wants to be in Gauteng. Speaking of Gauteng, if you look at the Western Cape and you ask Kawelo, especially where has the redress that the Democratic Alliance has been proposing all along, where has it worked? It has worked in the Western Cape. The Western Cape has got by far the lowest unemployment rate than any of the provinces in this country, where job creation is done by the private sector due to the fact that the Western Cape governments enable them to get this thriving economy that's conducive for investments. People want to come there because things are done right, and that is what we are trying to do throughout the rest of South Africa. I want to thank everybody from the media that's been here today, everybody online that watched this. I can promise you one thing, it is that this Democratic Alliance will not stop to fight for the rights of each and every South African. We will not stop until there's a job in every